Good morning, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about NPM, which stands for the Node Package Manager, and we're going to be talking about React and Vite. How does it work? Well, we want to get into React today. All right. The purpose of this lecture is that by the end of today, we'll know how to create a React environment and understand what's happening within our React environment. But before we can even do any of that, we need to understand how NPM works and how we can create an NPM project utilizing pure JavaScript. That way we can understand how our package.json works, how it interacts with package-lock.json when we install dependencies. And then that way, when we look at a Vite and React project, we can understand the folder structure and what's actually happening behind the scenes in our project. Now, before I get into any of these topics, does anyone have any questions over what I will be covering today? Okay, perfect. So let's get straight into it. So today we're going to talk about Node and NPM. Well, we've utilized Node before, right? And what do we mainly utilize Node for up to this point?
Running JavaScript files?
Yeah, whenever we want to run a JavaScript file, right? We just use Node. And if we wanted to enter a JavaScript terminal where we can just write pure JS, we can always just type in Node. And now I can say something like console log, hello, Victor. Right, but we know that it's essentially just a, how do I get out of this? There you go. We all know that it's essentially just either a command or a package that we can utilize within our computer to be able to interpret JavaScript code, right? Well, what is the difference between Node and NPM? Well, Node is the actual framework that we're using to interpret the JavaScript, but the PM is the package manager, right? NPM stands for Node Package Manager, meaning that it controls which version of Node we're utilizing, where our project is located, how to interpret our project into JavaScript code, and we can change the things about NPM, or we can alter a couple of attributes within our Node Package Manager so that our project does the exact behavior that we want it to do. So now with that said, let's go over a couple of NPM commands. So the first one we'll see is npm-v. Now, if I run npm-v, it's going to tell me the latest version of npm that I have installed within my computer. For me, it tells me 9.6.6. For all of you, you've all done your install fest a little bit more recently. Maybe you have a different version than I do, but everything should be working accordingly for all of our machines altogether. All right. Now, the next one is going to be, if I want to, well, before we start going into installments or anything like that, we actually want to create an NPM project, right? So before I do that, I'm going to create a directory here. I'm going to name it to-do list. And then I'm going to change directories into that to-do list. Okay, so we can see that my to-do list is empty. There's nothing within it, right? But the moment I run npm init, I'm going to get asked a series of questions. So now when I say npm init, it's going to tell me, hey, if you wanted something different than just to initialize a package.json, you need to let us know. Is there anything that you would like to name this package? So it's going to tell me, hey, what's the package name you would like to name this? And it assumes that you just want to name it the same thing as the directory. So let's just say or I want to name it task manager. Okay, it's going to ask me which version do I want to utilize. It's going to use 1.0. Description. This is just if I want to add a description to my package. So this will allow me to create, delete tasks. Entry point, it's going to suggest an entry point. It's going to ask me, do you want to make your entry point index.js? I definitely can. And then it's going to tell me, do you want a test command? I'm going to skip that for now. Is there a Git repository that you want to attach this to? Not really. I don't have any keywords. And for author, sure, why not? I'll just put myself. Really don't need a license. And then it brings up a sample terminal here. So now in this terminal, I'm getting a sample of an output of what my package.json would look like by the time I'm completed running this command. And that's going to ask me, hey, is this okay? So I put yes. And now we can see that in my to-do list, not only do I have, and well, in my to-do list that used to be empty, I now have a package.json, which is holding an exact mirror image of what was of that example output. All right, so it tells me, hey, here's the name of the application that you created, or the package that you've created. It's named the package manager. Here's the version. Here's the description of what this package is supposed to do. Here's the entry point, and here's a scripts. Now, what could scripts mean? We've gone over scripts before when we utilize jest. So can anybody tell me what scripts stands for, or what it does? This section of our package.json.
Like some kind of order operations for your program to run through.
Right. So this is something for me to basically specify to my program. Hey, when I run npm test, you're going to run this command. Currently, I don't have a testing framework, so it's just going to give me an error. It's going to say, hey, there's no testing framework specified. All right. And I could test that out. I can run npm test. And now we can see, hey, I ran task manager, which is at version 1. And it comes out with the command of test. And it gives me that echo command. So it tells me, hey, there's an error and there was no test specified. And then it says, and exit 1 and exit 1. So then I get error, no test specified. Right? It's able to interpret my package manager, run a script, and then get back a command. It's kind of like an alias, right? I can put in some really short verbiage here on the left side. On the right side, I could have it running a series of commands or multiple files within the same package all at the same time. Author, that's just something that's me. And then the license, which is ISC. Okay, so the license, you can be specified, but the common choices are ISC, MIT, or Apache 2.0. We'll go over licenses later on and what the differences are and what exactly it does. But for now, ISC will be covering our needs. All right, does anyone have any questions over what NPM init does? Okay, great. There's no questions over NPM init. So let me go ahead and delete this package.json. That package.json doesn't exist anymore. And now let's say that I wanted to create a package.json within this directory, but I didn't want to specify anything. There's nothing special about this. I just want to use the default values that are coming back. Well, I could probably run the same command and then just press enter all the way down until the command until it stops prompting me for questions. But there's definitely a smarter and easier way, right? I could always just run npm init-y. And that will automatically create a package.json with nothing but the default values. So here we see 1. There's no description because I didn't provide one. It tells me my entry point's index.js. It assumes that I don't have a testing framework. There's no keywords, no author, and it gives me the default licensing. And that was all by passing in the -y flag. And the -y flag is essentially saying any prompt that this command asks me for, you're just going to say yes to. So it's essentially the same as just pressing enter for every individual prompt, rather than just me manually doing it. The computer is doing it for me. Any questions between those two?
Do you usually use the default, or do you usually specify everything?
I usually just use the default. Once we get into actually creating our React projects, this package.json will be automatically generated for us. So you won't really have much interaction with package.json unless you're trying to specify a specific dependency in the project or a specific script within the project. Does that answer your question, Anna?
Yes, thank you.
Any other questions?
Maybe this was already answered, but like, why do we need this?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So why am I creating a package.json, right? What's the whole point of creating a node package manager? And actually that wasn't question that wasn't answered. So the whole purpose of this is to ensure that whenever I write JavaScript code, right? Or maybe I have multiple files of JavaScript code, multiple files of JSON objects, and maybe they're all interacting in different ways. Well, I could definitely have them interact the same way that we've had them interact before, maybe utilizing require to import different things, right? But those aren't modular imports. They don't know that they exist within one another or that they are connected to one another. Now, when I create a node package manager, that's saying, hey, all of these files that I'm listing here are within one module. So now I can do import statements rather than require statements. And that's allowing my project to know, hey, these two things are connected. And anything that's within this one module is connected to one another in some way, shape, or form. Now, why does that matter, right? If I could just utilize require, why do I have to go through the process of making a node package manager to be able to handle all this information? And that might be a little bit more of a complex question, but essentially it's just for performance and to ensure that if there is a mistake, it can be identified way earlier in the project rather than at runtime, and then we run into some unexpected issues. Does that answer your question, Clarice?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. All right, the next thing we're going to go over is dependencies, right? We've talked about Jest before, and we've utilized Jest, and we've seen dependencies of Jest. But today what we're going to be installing and talking about later on in this lesson will be Axios. So let's go ahead and install Axios real quick. Well, I'm going to reference my package manager again. So I'm going to say npm install Axios, and then I could just give it the save flag. So I'm saying, hey, I want you to save this installment into my package. So now in package.json, we're going to see a new key named dependencies populate, and it will have Axios within it. So now I'm going to run this command. And now we can see a dependencies key has been created within this object. It's holding an object of dependencies, and it's holding Axios in the current version of Axios that I've just installed. What other changes did we just see populate on my screen?
Keywords.
Okay, keywords we had before, but rather than just looking at the package JSON, let's look at the directory. This
The package-lock.json.
Yeah, this directory of to-do list now has a package-lock.json, and it has this node modules directory. Now, this node modules directory, we're never really going to interact with, but all this node modules directory is doing is it's holding any sort of, when we installed Axios, at the same time we installed Axios, we grabbed anything that we needed in order for Axios to perform correctly. Now, we need a place to store this information. We're not going to interact with it unless we need something very, very specific that we need to change. So the default place where it all gets dumped in is something called node modules. So within node modules, we see that we have an async kit, which I'm assuming has to do with making asynchronous requests with Axios. We see that we have an Axios kit, and that's just anything that Axios needs to actually be able to do what it's supposed to do, making API calls in any form way. But now this package-lock.json, what's going on here? Well, in package-lock.json, I see that I have the name, which is to-do list. So that's referencing towards the directory and not my package. Oh, it is referencing towards my package name. I apologize. So it's referencing towards my package name. It tells me the version of my package. It tells me which version it locked down. It has an example of what my package looks like, right? But then down here in node modules, we can see that it starts talking about a couple of other things. It starts talking about a couple of dependencies, how they connect to one another, and exactly what's going on here, right? So then that brings up the question, well, what's the difference? Why do I have a package JSON and then I have a package lock JSON? Does anybody want to take a stab at it?
I think with the package lock,
I'm assuming one's like a locked version that probably goes with our project. So it's like it tells, I guess, wherever our project is like hosted at or whoever's running it, it kind of just gives it information of what it needs to run. But you
Yeah,
want to lock it, manipulated.
awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, so basically our package.json is our project itself, right? It gives us all the commands in general that we need for our projects. But then once it gets down to this dependency section, once somebody else pulls down my project and wants to install these dependencies, they can't just say, oh, well, the dependency is Axios and this is the version. They need a lot more information than that. Well, that's where package-lock.json comes into play. Once I do NPM install, it's going to look at the dependencies, see that I need Axios, and then it's going to go into my package-lock.json, and it's going to, in detail, grab every single one of these different modules that I'm currently utilizing to ensure that Axios is running the same, and that I have the exact same version with the exact same conditions that I had in my local machine, so that anybody else who pulls it down, they have the same exact version with the exact same conditions. Now, main thing to remember is package-lock.json you will interact with. Package-lock.json you will not touch. Because if we touch manually package-lock.json, it could mess up our dependencies or which versions we're utilizing. But with package.json, this is the one that we will alter ourselves. Does anyone have any questions between those two?
Yeah, so package you're talking about package lock being like a version control between different users. It's specifically like a dev tool thing. Like it's nothing to do with like the end user that's going to be like using your apps or whatever, right? It's specifically for dev tools.
Yeah, so specifically for the environment that's actually running your application.
Gotcha.
Any other questions?
Hey, Francisco, can you just give a real quick example on like a script and the dependencies? I see Axios here, but like what are some other maybe dependencies we'd have or scripts?
Yeah, so for dependencies that you can utilize other than Axios, right? Well, we talked about Jest, so we could definitely install something like Jest, and I think for Jest, I may need the sudo command. Sudo npm install Jest -- save, I think something like that. Okay, and then that should install Jest here shortly. But essentially some dependencies that you could have is, well, we'll always have Axios because this we'll be making our API calls from now on. And then another dependency that you can have is Jest, which should be a testing framework. And then as you're creating your React project, you'll have different libraries that belong to React, right? Maybe you could have something like React Router DOM, which is going to essentially allow you to create a version of a website that you can route to different URLs paths to render different pages or components. Anything that you install to allow your project to run smoothly, you will have under dependencies. And that will also reflect both in package.json and package-lock.json. So for example, now that I installed Jest, if I look for Jest, we can see that it's been mentioned 295 times. But all of these times that Jest is mentioned, it's just a different portion of the Jest framework that needs to be installed in order for it to run correctly. Does that answer your question, Robert?
Yes, thank you.
Of course. All right. So now we've gone over all of these installments. We've gone over in detail over what package.json means, what is package-lock.json, and why do we have node modules, right? Well, the next thing that we want to do is actually create a project or utilize this to start something. So we can see that I have this task.json already in here. I'm just going to put this within my to-do list so that I have access to it. It's inside of my actual directory. So now I can actually manipulate it. Well, let's create a couple of files now. Let's say that I want to create index.js. And now when I create index.js, I can have it do something like console.log. Hello, Victor. Platoon. So now the question is, how do I run this code, right? I have this index.js, and I want to be able to run this code. Any ideas on how I can compile index.js?
You could put it in the scripts for the package.json.
Yeah, I could definitely put it in the scripts here and tell it what to do. But I was hoping that you guys would tell me to run node. So I'm gonna go ahead and show that example first. Right, so
Sorry.
definitely run node and run
I
node.
was definitely gonna say node, by the way.
Okay, perfect. So I could definitely run node with index.js, and we can see that node is actually compiling my console, right? But this isn't involving my package manager at all. So instead, what I'm going to do in order to compile this script, I'm going to go over to package.json, and I'm just going to simply add a new script. And in this one, I'm going to name it start. And then I'm going to say the command that I wanted to execute when I run start. So in this case, I wanted to run node index.js. So let's see what happens when I run this command now. NPM start. So the outcome's still the same. It's telling me hello, Victor Platoon, which is happening from that console.log statement. But the difference is that I'm utilizing my package manager at version 1, and I'm running the script of start. And the script of start runs node at index.js. And that's how I can get hello, Victor Platoon. One is actually doing it through my node package manager. The other one is just utilizing node the way we've been using it so far. Does anyone have any questions about this?
Sorry, what was the console command that you put in to run the package JSON?
Oh, NPM start.
Okay, cool.
So moving forward, is there any preferred method to running our files, whether it be with Node or NPM?
Yeah, from this moment on forward, now that we're talking about development environments and things that we're doing with React, we're always going to be utilizing NPM to be able to compile or run our development server. Does that answer your question, Eric?
Yes, thank you.
Of course. All right.
One more question.
Yeah.
Is the start just whatever we write in the script, calling it whatever it name, I guess?
Yeah, we could name whatever we would like it in here. I think there's a certain level of commands the scripts will accept. But maybe I can name it whatever I want. Let me see if I could do something like I don't know, maybe I can try stop. I wonder what happens if I do that. NPM stop. Yep. So pretty much anything that I name it or questions, it would still run the same command. It's just an alias, right? It's saying, hey, within the NPM manager, I want you to look at package-lock.json and look at the scripts, and I want you to run the following commands that correspond to the key of questions. Oh, and that one seems to have messed it up. NPM run questions. Yeah, that one seems to have messed it up. And it's probably because there's only a couple of actual commands that I can utilize in here. Oh. There you go. So start works, and let me see if there's other ones that I can do here. Okay, yeah, so here's a couple of commands that it allows me to use. So there's install, so for different ways that I would like to install. There's restart, if I want to restart something, there's stop. And I could just specify what these things are supposed to do once I run it. So now I wonder what happens if I remove the entire script, right? And I just run NPM start. Well, if I just run NPM start, it's going to tell me, hey, start is missing. It doesn't exist within my script. You need to tell me what am I supposed to do when I do that. And then it tells me, well, maybe NPM run, right? So let's see, NPM run. And when I run, it tells me, hey, you have a test command but this is all that belongs to test command. So now let's bring back that script of start. Oh, hello, come back. There you go. Let me run npm run one more time. Now, if I run on that script command, now I see that I have test and start, and I can utilize npm start to compile that same file. Does that address your question, Clarice?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so now let's start talking about a couple of import and export statements. So like I said before, we have this, and let me start closing these out. We need task.json and we need index.js. Okay. So now let's say I wanted to see these tasks or this array of tasks, this array of objects, and each one of those objects represents a task. How could I see that within index.js?
Right. Import tasks from tasks.json.
Nice. So we could definitely do something like Python, right? In Python, we have something along the lines of from dot classes import student, right? We have something like that. But now how could I do that and turn it into JavaScript? Well, in JavaScript, I want to say import what it is that I want to import. So in this case, I want to specify a variable named tasks, and then I could specify the path, right? I could say from task.json. Well, what happens when I console.log tasks? I run npm start, and it's telling me that I'm trying to import something, but then it says I can't use import statement outside of this module. Go ahead, Cody.
Actually, I think you're kind of getting at it. I was going to ask if we have to do absolute paths or relative paths.
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, we could definitely try doing something like an absolute path. Let's see. But even when I try to do something like an absolute path, it still tells me that I can't import outside of this module. So there's something else going on here. Is there maybe a different way that I can import this information rather than utilizing the import statement?
You can use require.
Nice. Yeah, so I could utilize something called require. So I can say constant tasks is equal to require, and that goes straight from JavaScript. That's the require function. So it knows that there is a file that I'm trying to grab something from. And what I'm trying to grab from is from task.json. Well, now let's see what happens when I run start. Well, now when I run npm start, I'm actually seeing an array of objects, and each object represents a task. But there's definitely a problem here, right? The whole reason why I started why I have a node package manager is because I want to be able to utilize this information. I want to be able to utilize an import statement, because a require says, hey, I want you to grab this file and make a relationship, but that relationship isn't explicit until runtime, until this is necessary. So there could be an error inside task.json, and I would never know about it until I actually run into the mistake during my program. Whereas if I were to do it with the node package manager, it would get identified from the moment the package starts building, right? Because it would make sure that all the scripts are correct. Well, what's going on then? What's the problem? Why can't I run this import statement? Well, the reason why I can't run this import statement is because I haven't specified to my package.json that we are working within a module, right? So let's go ahead and run npm start and take a look at that error. So now it's telling me, hey, you cannot use this import statement outside of a module. But now let's look at the warning. right? It says warning to load an ES module. So I want to grab something from the module. I have to set it to type module in package.json. Okay, let's take a look at that. We go to package.json, and I'm just going to simply say, hey, I want this to be a module. And now when I clear this and I run the start, now it tells me a different error. It tells me that I have a type error. So I do have a module that I'm installing, and I'm trying to bring in task.json, but now NPM is telling me, whoa, wait a minute, this is a JavaScript file, but you're trying to interact with JSON. And yeah, JavaScript knows how to interact with JSON, but maybe I need to explicitly tell it, this is a JSON file, so that when this compiles, my manager knows how to handle this and can make sure that there's an assertion within my import statement. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to change that assertion or make that assertion by asserting that this is a type, and the type is JSON. So now I'm telling it, hey, I want to make a variable named tasks. It's going to hold the data within task.json. And I want you to know that the type of information within task.json is in fact JSON data. So finally, when I run npm start, it is now grabbing an array of objects through the node package manager, utilizing the import statement. Does anyone have any questions about this?
So if you're using NPM and Axios, you don't have to worry about exporting anything from the JSON, then it's just an import statement.
Yeah, exactly. So if I were working with NPM and Axios, right? Currently I have NPM already installed, and we know that Axios is not a file. So how could I bring in Axios? Well, if I were to bring in Axios, I would say import Axios, and now it's looking inside of my package.json, and it knows that Axios already exists. So I can just click on there, and it would complete the statement for me. So it wants to import Axios from the package of Axios within my package-lock.json. Does that answer your question, Kate?
Yeah, thank you.
Of course. All right. So now moving on, let's talk about some other functions that JavaScript has before we continue breaking this down, right? I think at this point, we all understand node modules. We understand what's going on within package-lock.json, and we understand package.json. But there's a couple of things that we've done with JavaScript that was no longer going to be very beneficial to us when we're working within React. So we have to replace these tools. So now let's say I wanted to iterate through this array of objects and log each object to the console individually. How could I do that?
You want a map?
Yeah, I would eventually want to map, yes, but I was hoping you guys would tell me to use a for loop first. So I'm gonna go over the example of the for loop. So
I
let's
was gonna say for use a for and loop.
a for and loop. Okay, awesome. Let's do for task in tasks. And let's just console.log the task. Oh, and I have to utilize let in there. I forgot. Okay, so now let's run clear. Let's run npm start. Well, if I use a for in loop, I'm getting 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 5. These are all indexes. How could I change it so that it's actually logging the task itself rather than the index?
Do of instead of in.
Awesome. So now I'm just going to switch that for of. Now, when I run it, I can see I'm getting each individual object being logged into the console. So that's great. I can utilize a for loop to iterate through each item in the array. But I don't want to do that, because once I get into once I get into React, this for loop is not necessarily going to work to meet the purposes that I need. So now instead of utilizing the for loop, what I'm going to use is what Matt brought up. Matt brought up utilizing mapping. So instead, I'm going to say tasks.map. This map takes in a function. So what is it that I wanted to do? Well, I wanted to use the variable of task to refer to each one of the tasks within the function. And then all I wanted to do is I wanted to console.log set task. Now, when I run npm start, I get the same result. All right. Again, this task.map, it's saying, hey, I want you to go through each one of the indexes within the within this array. Each item in each index will be referenced to as task. And all I want you to do to set task is console.log task. Does anyone have any questions about this?
Can you just repeat that again?
Yeah, of course. So task is in referencing to the array of JSON objects. And it's saying, I want you to iterate from left to right. I want you to go from left to right on this array. And I want you to grab each individual index from this array. Now, each item within each index is going to be referenced to as task. And all I want you to do to task is log it to the console. Does that make sense, Robert?
Yes, I think so.
Awesome. So let's say I have an array of numbers, right? So let nums be equal to so I have this array of numbers, right? It's 1 through 8. Now let's say that I wanted to iterate through numbers. And for each number, I just want to add 2 into it before it gets logged into the console. How could I do that? Utilizing the map function.
You could do nums.map and put num in there. So take an argument, and then what you want it to do is to add 2. So console log num plus 2.
Perfect. So it's going to take the array of nums. It's going to iterate through it from left to right, grab each individual item within an index and reference it by the variable of num. And then all it's going to do is add 2 to num and log it to the console. So now when I run npm start, we can see that 1 is now 3, 2 is now 4, 3 is now 5, and so on all the way until 10. So there's our mapping function. Does anyone have any questions about map or its capabilities and limitations?
So essentially, if I could just check real quick, essentially what the map function does is it just goes through every element of something and does whatever to it that you told it to do. Right?
Yeah, exactly. All mapping function does is it is essentially just a for loop. All right. Map is the same thing as a for of loop. It's just a different syntax and it goes from left to right only. All right. So if I wanted to reverse this list or I wanted to do any sort of behavior to a list, I would have to do it prior to utilizing the mapping function. Whereas if I was using a for of loop, I could probably manipulate the list right here within these arguments. Okay.
Is there a map in Python?
There is a map in Python, but rather than utilizing map this way, it would look something like this, and then it would have the name of the list, and then it would take in some sort of lambda function so that you could tell it what it's supposed to do to each individual item. Does that answer your question, Josh?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
All right. So now we've gone over a couple of things here. We can see that if I can iterate through the task. So let me clear this. All right, I can iterate through the task. What if I just wanted to see the task name? in this logging statement. How could I do that? Currently right now I'm console.logging an entire object. So how could I just see the name? Go ahead, Clarice.
Can you do dot notation like task?
Yeah, perfect. This is JavaScript, so it's all getting interpreted that way. So I could do tasks.task. I can start it now. And now it's actually just telling me, hey, create a simple task file, build a simple to-do list, add the ability, et cetera, right? All of this is coming straight from the task. Okay, great. And I can utilize dot notation to do a couple of things. So I can say console.log. Oh, don't want to do that. I could do ID. And then I think there's task dot completed. And when I run it, it's able to give me all that information, right? It gives me the ID, gives me the name of the task, and whether it was completed or not. So all this is doing is identifying that there is an object. And this object has the, oh, don't want to do that. This object has the key of ID. It has the key of task. And it has the key of completed. So I can see that happening over and over again, right? I can see ID, I can see task, and I can see completed, and it's able to recognize that each one of those keys exists within each object. Well, if I know that this is consistent and that this is an object, well, then I can destructure this object, right? I can break this object apart. I can say, hey, every time you iterate through each one of these objects, I want you to grab the ID. I want you to grab the task, and I want you to grab the fact that it is completed or not. Well, now when I go to console.log this, I can say ID. Let's run this in start. We can see that it gives me the item IDs. I can say, hey, is this completed? We can see that it gives me whether it's completed or not. Or I can just grab the title, which is just task. And when I run it, it just gives me the tasks for each one of them. So what I am doing is I am taking this object or each one of these objects and I'm destructuring them. I'm basically destroying them and just grabbing the actual values for ID, task, and completed. Rather than utilizing dot notation, I'm taking it straight from the object. Does anyone have any questions about mapping or destructuring? Too easy? Too easy. All right. Okay. So now we've gone over mapping. The next thing that I want to go over is filtering. What if I only wanted to see all of the tasks that were completed, right? Let's say I want to just see tasks that are completed. Well, I can say something like tasks.filter. And this task.filter, rather than making an action, right? This task.filter will actually return a copy of a new array. So this is constructive, meaning that it is constructing a new array for me that I can save to something. So I could say something like completed tasks, and I can make that equal to task.filter. Again, I need to reference to each individual index that I'm running a comparison statement to. And then I need to tell it, what is it that I want it to do? Well, I want you to return all the tasks where completed is equal to true. And we want lowercase in this case. Well, now let me log on to the console, the completed task. And I forgot to put that in there. All right. Okay, so now when I run this, all it's going to give me is the to task where completed is actually true. So just like the mapping function, it iterates through each one of the indexes and it checks if these conditions are met. If these conditions are met, it throws it onto an array or a copy of an array, and that array gets saved to the new variable of completed task. I could also do it if it was false. Now it just returns to me all of the objects where the status of completed is false. All right, so it's essentially taking an array, checking which objects meet these conditions, and the objects that meet these conditions get thrown into a different array that gets saved within a variable named completed tasks, and that's what gets logged into the console. I could also utilize object destructuring here, right? I could say, hey, I want you to grab the tasks, I want you to grab the ID, and I want you to grab the fact if it's completed or not. And I can just say, hey, if this is completed, meaning that's true or false already, then those are the ones that I want you to return. And now we can see that I'm only getting those two, the two that were completed, right? I can do something like not completed, and that should only return the ones that are falsy. So now it's returning all the tasks that are false. And then also notice that I'm utilizing an arrow function. Well, if I utilize an arrow function with brackets, I need to actually place in a return statement. But if I take off the curly brackets, I don't need a return statement in order for this to work. It just knows that it's returning whatever's to the right of that arrow function. Whereas if I place curly brackets, it would actually run all that, and I have to explicitly tell it that there is a return statement. Does anyone have any questions over this?
Question, Francisco. Could we also declare a variable and then run the map function and kind of run it the same way as we're doing this here?
So you're saying use the filter function and then afterwards utilize the map function?
No, sorry. If actually, if we just go back up to the map function there, could we declare a variable and then say, like, doesn't map return a new array as well?
We could tell it to return. Yes, so I can say let task titles be equal to task.map. And then all I wanted to do is return task. All right, and then I can console, or I can log to the console the task titles. And now we get an array of tasks. All right, any other questions?
Is it preferred to use an explicit return statement or to remove the curly braces?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And it kind of depends on what you're doing, right? So for example, we have this numbers function here. So let's say that I have this numbers function. And what I wanted to do is make an odd number. So let odd numbers be equal to, at this point, I would want to do something like mapping. And the reason why I want to do something like mapping with an actual return statement is because I have to run some sort of logic, right? I can't just say, well, I want you to return every single number. Now I have to run some logic. I want to say if, and then I can say if the num modulo 2 is not equal to 0, then I want to return that number. All right, and now I can log it onto the console. And now I would only get, oh, what's going on here? Why did I get undefined? Oh, I probably have to specify an else, I guess. Else. Pass, maybe. Oh, it's not pass. I think it's continue. Is it none? Can't remember if it's none or if it's not none, but it's, oh, it's null. There you go. I think that will pull null statements within there. Test titles is not defined. Where is that happening? Oh. Okay, so we can see that I'm getting the information, but the only ones that I'm getting is now odd numbers, all right? And that's because I'm actually running some logic here. I'm saying, hey, I only want you to do this for odd numbers. But now when I say else, I would want it to return nothing. And now we can see that I'm getting null for all of the even numbers, right? It's returning a value for everything, whether I tell it to or not. I think I can do something like return this way. We'll see. Nope, that's still returning undefined. So this is still a function, right? And it's expressing everything as a function. So it's expecting a return value. If there is no return value, it's going to place undefined within that placement. But you want to have explicit return values for anything that you're running logic into. If you're not running any logic, then don't even put the arrow brackets. Just put in the number that you want to return, right? If I'm not returning anything, I'm not doing any sort of logic. I just want to return num plus 2. Then I could just do that. Does that answer your question? I think that was Josh that asked that question.
Yeah, that answers my question. Thank you.
Awesome. Okay, so now the last thing that I want to cover before we go ahead and take a break is going to go ahead and be Axios. All right, we've gone over fetch. We've gone over how to make requests with fetch. But now I want to talk about how to make requests with Axios. We're going to be utilizing Axios from this moment on forward. So I guess before we even start talking about seeing any code, the first thing we should cover is, well, why would I want to utilize Axios instead of utilizing fetch? Well, we saw the get function with fetch, and the get function with fetch worked pretty easy. All right, it was pretty smooth. All I had to do was request data. But once we start talking about other types of requests, such as put, post, or delete, there's a couple of other parameters that you have to specify to fetch in order for it to work properly. And you have to give it different headers. And there's a lot of manipulating that has to go into fetch in order for it to work properly whenever I'm trying to send more complicated requests. Whereas Axios, as we saw, whenever I installed Axios, it already comes with a bunch of modules installed into it. And not only does it come with a bunch of modules, but it comes with a bunch of headers that Axios already has in order to have permissions into into all these different APIs. So with that said, it's going to make our interactions with our backend or with our backend framework or any sort of other API a lot easier to use. So now when I utilize Axios, just like fetch, I can say, hey, I want you to get information, right? And let's say we utilize the Pokey API again, just for some practice. Well, now, what is it that I wanted to do once I get this information? Well, again, it's going to get a response. So for now, I just wanted to console.log response.data. And before, we didn't have this .data attribute. We had to turn it into JSON, return a JSON object, and then we had information within it. Well, now with Axios, it already interprets it into JSON, and we can interact with response.data. So now when I run npm start, we can see that I'm getting an actual response from the Pokey API already. All right, I can still utilize everything the same way. I can go into .sprites and then front default. And when I run this, we can see I get back a Pokey API sprite that I can open. Let me go ahead and bring this over. And there's our ditto. All right, we're getting our ditto back. Now we've gone over .then and def before, but we haven't gone over what happens if there's a mistake. All right. So let's talk about handling errors. When it comes to errors, we want to utilize something like catch. Oh, that was scary. Okay, and when we utilize something like catch, it would look like this. We want to grab the error boundary. So we're going to reference something as error. And then we want to specify what it's going to do. Well, I wanted to console log something went wrong. And then I actually want it to tell me that error. So let's say that we make a mistake here. Let's say we give it a number that doesn't exist. I hope that doesn't exist. Well, let's see.
Try 1294. Oh, never mind. That works too.
Okay, so now if I run this information. Okay. Sorry, I'm trying to find the beginning of this command here. Okay, so here it tells me a warning happening, and here's the warning, right? So something went wrong. That's where I put in there. That's what I wanted to console log into the console. But then it goes into an Axios error. It tells me that the request failed with a status code 404, meaning it wasn't able to find this ID for a Pokemon. And then it tells me, hey, the error is because you sent a bad request. It's not the API's fault. This is your fault. You sent a bad request. And then it tells me that everything else worked within the request. I was able to send something through JSON, it grabbed something through JSON, but it wasn't able to clarify it because that timed out because it never got a response. There's a couple of other headers here that we can take a look at. But the main thing is that we can see that our request has been handled and that there was an error, right? I don't have to actually console.log this error. I can just say maybe if error.status code, and I think that was in there. Let me double check here. Oh, that's a lot. I'm not sure if that's in there. Let's see. Let me try to make that same request and see if I can get it. Okay, so status is undefined. There you go. So now I can see a shortened version of that error in here. Right? I can say, hey, go inside the error object, and I want you to just console.log the message of what this error cost. So now we can see, hey, the request failed with the status code 404, and I can also see that something went wrong. right? I am catching this error, meaning that the error is being handled and it's returning it. And then I can also put this within a try and catch block. Now this is happening within a request, right? This is happening when it's not asynchronous. So now I wonder what it would look like when it is asynchronous. So let's do this kind of quickly because I want to make sure that we're sticking to our hour break. So let's get a Pokemon. This is going to be an asynchronous function. And now we're going to grab a response. So first I'm going to say, I want you to try to do the following. So let response be equal to Axios.get. And I wanted to grab this information here. Okay, and then I wanted you to console log the response. If there's an error within that try block, I want you to catch said error. And I want you to console log the error message. Okay. Oh, I forgot a wait here because we want to make sure that this is an asynchronous function. So now let me go ahead and call this function really quick. When I run NPM start, it's running an asynchronous function. It sent a request. That request then failed. And before console logging my response, the try block failed and triggered the catch block to be able to return request failed with status code 404 as the error message. All right. So for this portion of the lesson, we've covered node package modules. We've covered package.json and package-lock.json, how to alter our script tag or our scripts within the NPM manager, how to utilize Axios, and handle request errors within asynchronous and non-asynchronous functions utilizing the .then method. Does anyone have any questions over anything that I've covered so far?
I have a quick question about the async versus non-async functions. When would you use the non-asynchronous functions?
Yeah, you could utilize the non-asynchronous functions anywhere that you would use a synchronous function. The only difference would be that you would have to handle it through .then and then write all of your logic in here. Whereas if in asynchronous functions, you can always have all the logic continuing on, right? There's really that's
kind of
which one
preference.
you use. It's just syntactical sugar. Oh, go ahead, Robert.
Okay. So it's just kind of preference, whichever you prefer.
Yes, it's mostly preference.
Okay, copy that.
Any other questions? Okay, we've gone a little bit over our hour mark. I'm going to go ahead and pause the recording at this point. All right, welcome back, everyone. Before we left, we ended up talking about Axios, how to make a couple of requests, set up our project, talked about import statements, and we talked about all of these node modules and packages and package-lock.json and a couple of other things. Now, we covered all of this information, but why did we cover it, right? What's the grand scheme of things? Well, in the grand scheme of things today, we're going to be introducing Vite and React. So first thing is, what is React, right? I'm sure everyone here has already looked up what is React or has done some sort of React interaction. Can anybody tell me what is React?
Magic.
It's a library.
Okay, magic library sounds good. So React is a front-end framework, right? And this front-end framework was actually developed and pretty much has been continuously been developed by Facebook. Now, Facebook was actually really smart, and what they did is when they created this framework is they open sourced it so that a bunch of other developers can interact with it. And by getting a bunch of other developers to interact with it, they got consistent feedback on, hey, there's this bug, this is how you can fix it, this is what I did. And from there, React has become more and more common throughout the industry for front-end frameworks. Now, when it comes to front-end frameworks, React is actually really powerful, and they actually is something called oh man, I just forgot what it's called. I just had it off the top of my head. React Native, there it is. So there's React Native for phone development, right? And it's essentially the same exact syntax that you'll see in a regular React application for web applications, except that instead of utilizing HTML and CSS tags, they utilize tags that belong to phone development or things that go along with phones. So let's talk about Vite. All right, we talked about what is React. Well, what's Vite? React is really powerful in the form that it comes in with all these built-in things. But something that's always been missing is a rollup or a way to kind of modularize all of the aspects that fall into React or into a React project. Well, that's where Vite comes in. Vite essentially takes your React application and it gives it like a power up, right? It says, oh, okay, well, we have this React application. Now, instead of having to make a node server or having this React application having to compile in some form of other server, we'll take care of it. We'll compile your React application for you, and we'll render it in some sort of development server for you to interact with it and make changes to it rather than having to place it in some sort of other way of hosting it. So now let's create our actual project here. Here, I'm going to go ahead and change directory 1 back so that I'm not within the same to-do list that we have created utilizing our NPM. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create Vite. So I'm going to say NPM create Vite. Now, when I run this command, oh, hello. I did it wrong. NPM create Vite, maybe. There it is. Now, when I run this command, it's going to prompt me for something called a project name. What is it that you would like to name your project? Well, in this case, I'm just going to call it maybe number guessing. And that's going to ask me, well, which one of these frameworks would you like to utilize? We can see that they have Vanilla.js, they have Vue, React, Preact, which I have no idea what this is, Lit, Svelte, Solid. They have all these other frameworks that you can utilize with Vite. But in our case, we want to make our application in React. And that's going to have you choose a language. Now, this SWC is a little bit more advanced than what we need. So all we're going to go ahead and choose is going to be the regular JavaScript. Okay. And now we can see that inside of my directory, I now have a number guessing directory. And it tells me specific directions on how I can run this number guessing directory. So one, it tells me to change directory into number guessing. Okay. And then the next thing it tells me to do is run npm install. Now we just went over package.json, all these other things. What does npm install do?
It installs all the packages in the package.json.
Yeah, so let's take a look at package.json real quick. So it's going to go into my package.json. It's going to make sure that I have these scripts readily available. We can see that it's already a module. So this entire thing is modular. And then we can see that there's a couple of dependencies. Not only do I have dependencies, but I also have something called development dependencies that have to do with React plugins or Vite plugins. None of these things that I have to automatically generate myself or manually generate myself. Instead, Vite said, oh, you want to make a React project? Well, then you're going to need all of these things in order to create a React project. Now, it all exists within here, but this doesn't exist within my machine. So now the next thing I need to do is run npm install. And we can see that it's starting to build my entire React application. It's making sure that my project is able to run correctly, that everything's compiling. And once that is completed, and I have all of those dependencies installed, 2 things were created. What were those 2 things?
Is it your package JSONs?
So I already have my package JSON, right? Nothing was created within it. But something else was created to keep track of my dependencies. Right? We know package JSON keeps track like on the superficial level, but what does my package JSON interact with to know which exact dependencies it needs and which packages those dependencies need to come with?
The package lock.
Yeah.
The config.
And there it interacts with our package-lock.json, and then it also installs this node modules, right? And node modules just comes in with all the things necessary in order for JSON to run correctly. So now the next prompt that it tells us is, hey, if you want to run your server, you have to do NPM run. Okay, where do I find this script? This run dev, where's this coming from?
Package.json.
Okay, so let's take a look at package.json. And here are my scripts. So it tells me you want to run a script here, and that script is dev. And when I run dev, it calls the Vite package, which is in my dependencies down here, my development dependencies of Vite. So let's see what happens when I run that command. So I'm going to say npm run dev. Well, I run npm run dev, and it gives me, hey, there's something at this local host. We've seen this before, right? When I ran Flask, it told me, hey, this server is running on this specific port on your local host. When we ran live server, it told me, hey, this is running on a specific port. And actually, we could probably click on go live here, and we can see that it's telling me, hey, in your machine and port 51305, we're running a specific template. I can tell it to stop now. I don't really need it. It was just trying to show an example. But now I know that this exists. So with that said, I can open it up. And this is now what I get on my screen. At localhost 5173, I have a front-end application that's rendering a Vite and React app. Well, where's all this coming from? All right. Let's take a look here. If I go to inspect this information, it's telling me that there's some sort of index.html here. All right, I can look in here. I see some form of index.html. I have this div named root, this other division that has the SVGs to React and Vite. Okay, I have my h1 tag, and I have all this information, and it's coming from index.html. Well, let's take a look at index.html. What's in there? Well, index.html doesn't have any of that information. All right, so where could all of this HTML that's inside of the root, because that's all index has. Index just has a division named root. Where could all of this other anchor tags and h1 tags be coming from?
That main that main script.
Okay, so it's telling me that there's a script here that's a type of a module, and it's coming from main.jsx, which is within source. So let's take a look here. So it tells me, hey, go inside of source, and there is something called main.jsx. Nice. So in main.jsx, I can see this document get element by ID, which is grabbing the root. And here we see the ID of root. And then it's telling it that within this ID of root, it's going to render this application. All right, so it's rendering app. Well, this still isn't the HTML that I'm seeing here, right? I'm just seeing something called app. So what is app? Or where can I find the code for app?
You'll find it in App.jsx.
Yeah, so I can see in the import statement up here, telling me it's importing app from app.jsx. Okay, well now if I take a look at app.jsx, now I can actually see the division tags with all the anchors. I can see the H1 tags, and I can see the button that has a counter, and all these other informations, right? So there's my button. If I click on this button, it's changing. That's all happening from this onClick function here. Okay. And that's the relationship between index.html, main.jsx, and app.jsx. Now, the next question is, what about all this style? Where's it coming from?
The app.css.
Yeah, I see this app.css here. So now if I take a look at app.css, it has all of this information here, right? And there's also an index.css. Now, where's index.css being imported into? It's being imported into main.jsx. So now, one of the common questions that we always get is which one of these should we use, right? Should we be utilizing index.css or app.css? I strongly recommend you just utilize one of them. Don't utilize both, just utilize one of them. Index CSS will always take priority over app.css. But index CSS only has access to the things that exist within index, which is essentially nothing. So I would recommend that you leave index CSS completely empty and you do all of your styling within app.css. So I'm going to go ahead and take off all of the styling that it has. Now, when I look back at my package.json, well, this is what I actually have, right? I have two icons, each one of them with a link. See, I can open the link in the new tab. That takes me over to Vite, and it tells me what Vite is, what it does. It tells me how to get started. There's even a why should you choose Vite here, and it tells you the problem and how they are the best next thing and how they solved it. I can take a look at the React documentation and it tells me, hey, here's React. Here's a couple of things that you should know that you may want to know before you start utilizing our framework. And then I have a button that I can click on and increase the number. If I refresh it, that button gets back to 0. And then it gives me this hint. It tells me, hey, if you want to change anything here, you can just edit the source app and then that automatically gets rendered. So now, what is this HMR, right? That stands for hot module reload. Now, what that means is that basically anytime I change anything on app.jsx and it is saved, it will automatically update my application. So I can go to app.jsx. I can find this H1 tag eventually. Here it is. And I could change that for hello, Victor Platoon. Now that I stop typing, it gets saved. And as soon as it's saved, it does a hot module reload. It says, hey, this module has now changed, meaning it's hot. And now that it is changed, well, now we have to reload the entire page so that it updates and it shows me my changes on real time. All right, so that's one of the big benefits to the Vite development server. It's able to do hot module reload. Okay, I've covered quite a bit of information at this point. Before I continue moving forward, I would like to ask if anyone has any questions for me or any questions over anything that we've covered up to this point.
When you do these projects, do you just delete everything? Like if you're like, you don't want any of this Vite stuff for your actual projects?
Me, myself, yes. I just delete pretty much everything that's coming on here because I know I don't need it.
Yeah.
I guess which JSX is it still just app versus main?
I don't understand that question. Could you elaborate a little bit?
Like there's a main.jsx and then there's the app.jsx. Are we still just using the app one?
Well, they're both being utilized, right? Because app.jsx gets imported into main.jsx. Main.jsx acts as a connecting file between index.html and what's happening in app.jsx. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Any other questions? It all seems pretty straightforward, huh? Okay, fantastic. That's a good thing. So now the next thing that we're going to talk about is writing JavaScript within dates, right? We can see you can have multiple apps in your projects. Okay, so we can see this all being rendered. Let me go ahead and get rid of it. And let's say that all I want to do is h1 hello Victor Platoon. Okay, so now everything's gone. I don't need this. We're not going to get familiarized with that today. So please don't worry about it. So now I have this h1 tag. That's all that's being shown. And I've noticed something new in our syntax. What is this? What's going on here? Right? Because this isn't a division. But it's not any form of element at all. So now the question is, why would I need something like this? Right? Well, let me create a p tag here. Put some lorem ipsum in there. All right, so we can see that currently everything is being rendered on the screen, right, with 2 tags. And if I go over to my elements on the right-hand side, I can see my element has a body. And within that body, I have a division named root. Again, that's coming from index.html. Let me get rid of anything I don't need right now. So there's the division named root from index.html. If I open up that division, the next thing I see is an h1 tag and my paragraph tag. But I don't see these empty quotation marks or these empty elemental tags, right? Well, if I remove these tags, we can see that I start getting an error, right? It's telling me, hey, we can't render this information. So let's take a look at the error now. So it highlights both of the tags, and then it says JSS elements must be wrapped in an enclosing tag. All right, so it tells me I have to have a parent tag. So every element or everything that I return here must be wrapped within one tag. Now I can make it a division. What's happening here? Oh, there it is. I can make it a division. But if I make it a division, we can see that now root has a child of a division. And then that division has this h1 element and this paragraph tag. Well, that's weird because before we didn't have a child division. We just had root and then an h1 and paragraph tag. But now we have this division here. Well, these are called fragments, right? This is a fragmented tag. It's saying this is not a division. Don't consider this a division, but know that all of these concepts are all gathered up together as one. So that way I don't have to actually manually provide a div or a parent division myself. So now I have this division with the ID of root. And as soon as I open it, I have an h1 tag and a paragraph tag. Does anyone have any questions over fragmented tags or how this return value works when it comes to returning HTML?
I just want to say I love this because I was trying to play with the static pages by using string literals to make a bunch of division tags and stuff. And being able to do this is so awesome.
Nice. All right, great. So now let's talk about a little bit of the syntax that's going on here, right? We see we're creating an app, but this app isn't an HTML tag, right? What is this? What kind of language am I mainly utilizing here?
JavaScript.
Yeah, it looks like JavaScript, right? I'm utilizing a JavaScript function. So this is a functional component. And this function, instead of returning actual JavaScript code or a string or any sort of data structure like that, it's returning HTML. So it's actually returning HTML, and that HTML is actually being rendered onto the screen. So that's the cool thing about React, right? I'm able to write both my JavaScript and my HTML all within one file so that I can immediately access it. Now, I know the first thing that's going to come up is, isn't it important to modularize things, to have our behaviors living in other places, and in order to make our files clean? And yes, you're definitely right. We'll go over which things should be living within the actual component that's being returned, and what should be living within something called utilities.jsx, which is where most of your logic will live within a utilities file that then gets imported into different components. But in each individual component, you'll have something called hooks, which will then get rendered onto the screen. But that's all content for later on. For now, we're going to concentrate about the interaction on how we can write JavaScript within the same file in order to change the information in here. So now, without making it too complicated, right? Let's say we wanted to make a guessing number game. Can somebody walk me through the HTML that I would need in order to create a number guessing game here?
Some sort of input to where you can input a number.
Okay, so there's my number.
A button to submit it.
Maybe a title would be good too.
What tag would I use for a title?
Yeah, H1 sounds good.
Okay, and then what title do we want in there?
Guess the number.
Right. All right, so now we have an H1 tag, we have an input field, and we have this submit button that's supposed to submit something. But currently I don't have anything to submit. Are we trying to place this inside of a form?
Yes.
All right, so let's make that into a form. All right, so now we have a form, we have a number guessing operation or guess the number title. What about output, right? What if I want to tell, let's make it to where we can tell the player their prior guesses, and then we can also see if they were too high or too low. How do we do that?
Make an array for the prior guesses that's empty.
Oh, okay. So now we're going to the logic. So now any logic would happen before. So let guesses be equal to an empty array. Okay, what's next?
For the HTML, add a maybe a UL tag with a certain ID, and then add to it every time the person guesses by adding a LI tag.
Okay, so every time a person guesses, an LI tag should be added. So let me comment that out here. Okay, what's next?
For the input, maybe on submit,
Okay.
add a function call.
Nice. So on submit, I want to add a function call. And I'm going to be passing an event into this submit. So take a guess. So this is how I'm gonna be writing my function, right? Whenever I make a function call, I'm gonna pass in the event, and I'm passing it through an arrow function to take a guess. Okay, so now I made it take a guess. Does take a guess exist right now?
No, you have to make a function, take a guess.
Alright.
With that, it's in the event and then prevents default.
All right, so now we have a guess. Let me go ahead and. Okay, so I'm pressing enter, I'm submitting, nothing's happening, that's good, I'm preventing the default behavior. What's next?
We want to generate a random number as well.
All right, let's say const random number. Let's make that equal to math.floor, and then we want math.random. And we want to multiply that, let's say 50 for now. And then I think we need +1. Okay. So now we have our random number function. It takes in or we have our random number constant, and we have a function of take a guess. What's next? What do you got, Fu?
So when you submit the number, is it had to be like go to a different variable?
That's up to you. Is that what you want? What variable would you like, and how would I grab that number when I submit it?
I guess you can do constant guess equal to I think E, right, for the event.
Okay, so const guess and make that equal to E for the event. All right.
And then I think you can compare the number with the random number.
But what is this event? This event is just an event on the HTML page, right? But you said you wanted the input that's coming from in here. So how could I grab the input from this guess?
I don't know.
Okay. Mason?
Would it be E dot input?
So it wouldn't have to do with the event, right? Because our event is interacting with the form being submitted. But I do know that my input field exists down here. Maybe there's a way that I can grab that input field and then take the value out of that input field when that form is submitted. How could I do that?
It would be document dot form. And then you'd grab the index of input, which would be 0.
You could also get since the form is getting submitted, you can get the form data.
Yeah, I could do some form data, definitely. I think the easiest way of doing this would be to give this an ID, right? And then just say, guess. I don't think I've utilized that ID anywhere else. And I can just say, get element by ID, guess dot value. Okay, so now I have that guess that the user goes ahead and inputs into the field. What's next? I have a random number. I'm able to take in the user input. What's the next part?
Check if. Go ahead. Sorry.
I was.
Okay, so we have this let guess, and I think you guys were talking about typecasting right before I left. So let's see. Let's console.log what we have now. Let's console.log the guess. And let's console.log the random number. Let's go over to our console. Maybe I put in 5 and I submit. So there in my console, I can see I have the number 5, which is the guess that I inputted. And I can see the number 9. Okay, I can do something like type of to check what type it is. I submit, I can see that I have a string and a number of 48. So I have a string of 5 and a number of 48. How do I fix that? What's next?
Wrap the DOM in int.
Okay, so I want to, you said this number, put it into it, turn it into a number. So let's do that. Okay, so now I have a number that's being coming back instead of a string. What's next?
Check it against the random number. Check the guess against the random number. And if it's the same, do something else. Do something else.
Okay, so if it's the same as random number, and then else, what about else?
I'll just use some console logs.
I was gonna say append that pass guess to the guesses list.
Okay, so now we have guesses dot append. And I think in this case we want
Be push.
push. We're gonna take in the guess. Okay. So what happens if it is correct?
You'll still need another area in your return statement below that will allow you to show whether it's you've got it or if you need to go higher or lower. So we could probably do like a P here, a paragraph.
Okay. And then what do you ID, maybe the output? Okay, so then what you're saying is document dot get element by ID output. And then maybe we could do this prior to. Okay, so if they got it the right, it's gonna pull out an H1 tag and it's gonna say, hey, you won. All right, but what about otherwise? So we see that we're pushing the number into the guesses. What else needs to happen?
You need a comparison if it's too high or too low.
Okay, so if guess is greater than random number, then an else. Okay, so what now?
Your output would be, instead of you won, too high or too low.
Okay, so let's take a look at what we have here. I'm gonna refresh this. I'm gonna say 5. Submit, it's too low. Okay, 40. Still too low. Okay, 49 is too high. 45 is too high. Okay, 42, I won. Great. So that's working pretty well, but it's not showing me that unordered list with all of my prior guesses. So what now? How do I fix that?
You can create an element and then create like a list in unordered list.
Mm-hmm.
List item rather.
Do you want me to create a list item?
Yeah, is
Yeah.
that wrong?
No, definitely. So I could do something. Well, what I'm saying is we have this array, right? And we could definitely do something like maybe at the end of all of this, right? Once it says whether it's inner or outer, maybe I can say document get element by ID. And I think the ID we gave it was guess taken. I can do append. Oh. Append child. And maybe I could do something like let li be equal to document dot create element, make this an li, and then make the inner text of the li be equal to, I think it was the guess. I could definitely do something like this, right? Where I could put in 50, submit it, it's gonna tell me, oh, it's too high. 30, that's still too high. 20 is too low, 25, and then I want, right? And I could do it this way. But that's definitely not the React way of doing this, right? Because at this point, I'm just utilizing plain old JavaScript. Nothing's changing. But I do know that I have this array of guesses. Well, here's where the huge benefit of using React comes in, right? I have this HTML of UL. It's an unordered list. Well, what I can do is within this unordered list, reference guesses. And I can say that I would like to map through guesses. I'm going to reference each individual guess. And what I would like it to do is I would like it to return li tags. And for each li tag, I want to show a guess. And this may not work because we're not utilizing useState. So if it doesn't work, that's okay. We just will forget that this ever happened. Okay, yeah, so this isn't working, and that's because we're not utilizing useState. So we're just going to utilize that plain JavaScript way that I just demonstrated instead. But we will go over how this works here shortly once we are once we start talking about more React application tomorrow. All good. I already forgot it. Thank you. All right, so we can refresh it. We can place it in 25 or 35. That's too high. We can say 25, still too high. 15, still too high. I don't know, 7, too low. 9, 10, okay, 13, 12. There it is. And we just built our entire guessing game inside of one HTML application. Okay, and we can see how these import statements are working. If we wanted to do something like being able to see all of our data, how could we do that? All right, let's say that I made a directory named data. So I make a new folder and I name it data. This folder should be living within the source folder. And inside of data, I just make a copy of that task.json. So I'm going to copy it. I paste it inside of data. So now we see that data has task.json. How could I grab task.json from within that source document and import it into app.jsx? How do I do that?
You do import tasks from, and then in parentheses, the /task.json.
Okay, well, in // from app.jsx, there's nothing. Okay, oh, I apologize. There's two folders. There's assets, data, and then a file named main.
You have to do data and then / again, and then the task.json.
Nice. And I think now let me check if it'll work this time. Task.map. Task. Okay, that time it worked.
I think last time it wasn't working because you had taken out your push statement for the guesses.
Did I really?
Oh, never mind, it's still there.
No, it's still there. Okay. No, it's happening because of the virtual DOM and DOM. That's why. But we'll go into talking about that later on. Okay, so now we can see how I'm importing this task.json, right? And once I import this task.json, I want to display each one of them as a list item. Well, I just simply put my mapping function within this UL element. And instead of having it return plain old JavaScript, I want it to return list items. Now, when I go to write JavaScript, right, because here within the list item, I'm referencing the task object and the task key within that task object. So this is writing JavaScript. I would have to do that within curly brackets, right? So any JavaScript within this HTML would go in curly brackets. Does anyone have any questions over how we created this number guessing game, how to import how import statements work within Vite and React, and how to map through individual arrays or objects utilizing Vite? Okay. If there are no questions, then that is all the topics that we have for today. Let me go ahead and stop the recording at this point.